I love that. Aren't the acoustics great for that flute? It's just awesome. All right, and now let's find out. What size will your heart be at the end of 2019? Michael Bogar.
That's kind of an ominous title. We're not talking about biology here, so we're talking about the spiritual heart. Thank you, first of all, for the music. Yeah, this was a gift to hear from you this morning. Thank you. You're the guitar. Is this called a flute?
The Native American flute.
Native American flute. I saw the coyote on there. Yeah. And your voice. Thank you. It was a gift from me. All right. Hi.
Hi.
So, 2019, right? The time for resolutions? No, we're too old for that. I agree with you. It's not the time for resolutions. I'm going to do a little mic here. Does that work okay? We good? Good? So what I would like to focus on this morning is one idea, and that is, as we move into 2019, what is going to happen over this next year for each of us? Now, a lot of times we ask the question, how will this year be different? Right? I'm not going to ask the question how. I'm going to ask the question, who will I meet this year that will change my heart? How many of you are familiar with Dr. Seuss, How the Grinch Stole Christmas?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody not familiar? The story's very basic. It's a story of a group of people who live in Whoville, and they are called the Who's. So the Who's live in Whoville, obviously. Now, right next to Whoville, there is a mountain called Mount, but remember? Mount Crumpet. And on the top of Mount Crumpet, north of Whoville, lives the Grinch. Now, the Grinch and Whoville are in separate locations, but they are in juxtaposition to one another, and that's either purposeful or it's an accident. And I'm going to suggest that Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel was his actual name, wrote this story. Do you know what his occupation was before he wrote so-called children's books? He was a political cartoonist. So during World War II, he just poured out political cartoons, one after the other, and was very involved in international and national and global affairs. So he was very astute when it came to relationships at a higher level and at a personal level. So when he wrote the children's books, he was writing to say that not only are we globally related, we're in relationships with other nations, other states, other towns, etc., we're also in relationship with other people. And the story of How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a story of relationships. And I'm going to suggest that it's a story about who you're going to meet this next year that's going to change your heart. Because that's what the story is about. I think the title is not a very good title. I think the title, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, would better be, Who's Going to Change Your Heart This Year? Now, I'm going to suggest that the focus this morning, to give you some idea where we're going, let's see if I can get this thing to work here. It's not how, but who. It's not, the talk this morning is not going to be on self-help books. I heard somebody one time say that if you took all the self-help authors and lined them up around the world, it would be a good place to leave them. Another friend of mine says the problem with self-help books is that they're written by somebody else. You understand? The person who wrote the book went through their personal, unique experiences in life, and their heart was transformed by the Who's they met. And then they tried to write it for other people, which sometimes is helpful, but basically it's not helpful because you are uniquely related to other Who's. And the self-help books, they're okay, but that's not our issue. We're not asking how you change, we're asking who's going to change you this year. We are in this world to be transformed. That's my continuing, increasing belief. It's a story of relationships. Not how, but who. Not resolutions, but relationships. Resolutions to me are too self-centered. It's like, I'm going to change my life. In fact, a lot of times I noticed that in our some of our New Thought circles, it's a lot about I. That's okay, that's great, but it needs to be complemented or completed with we. So the I and the we go together. You are not going to change this year without being around other who's. Damn. Not self-help, but self-reflection. Now, welcome to Whoville. Here's the Grinch. Anybody know this little character here? That's Cindy Lou Who. It's in a way, we're not going to get into it this morning, but in a way, it's another story on the theme of Beauty and the Beast. Because each of us is a beauty and a beast. And each of us in every relationship we're in, especially close relationships, we are either the beauty or the beast. And it depends on the moment. Each of us kind of changes roles. And I know that we come here, we talk about our empowerment, and I love all the things we talk about here, but many of us know that when we leave this room and we go out into life, we meet other who's, and we become either Cindy Lou Who's or Grinches. Anybody know their inner Grinch? Come on. I do. And I'll share a little bit more about my experience of this in a couple of minutes. So as we move into this story, we're going to take the idea of John Keats with us. John Keats, 19th century poet, 1819, age of 25. I want you to get this in mind. Age of 25, Keats is dying of tuberculosis. Anybody have a family member in the distant past that had TB? My mother did. She was in the hospital for 2 years. Survived. But Keats had tuberculosis. He had just nursed his brother through tuberculosis to death. His brother died of TB. People around him were dying of tuberculosis. He knew he was dying of tuberculosis. He would die at the age of 25, just as his poetic career was about to be launched. He was just getting recognition. And he wrote a letter to his brother just a year or so before he died, and he said this. He said to his brother, let's imagine that this world is the valley of soul-making, where each heart must feel and suffer in 1,000 diverse ways in order to transform the tiny spark of ego into an expanded, unique soul. Now, Keats didn't write this as an academic dissertation. Keats wrote this as he was coughing up blood and knew that he was going to perish, probably within the next few months, which he did. So he suggested to his brother that maybe each of us comes into this world in order to grow a tiny ego spark into a vast, unique soul through the experiences we suffer and go through in this world. Now, in the story of how the Grinch stole Christmas, this is exactly what we find. We find the Grinch up on Mount Crumpet, and his heart was 2 sizes too small. In fact, in the beginning of the story, it says something like this, and actually I'm going to read it to you. Because I happen to have Dr. Seuss's Gospel According to the Grinch. And I'll read exactly how he starts the story, because he really gives us this idea of different reasons for the way we are. Let's see. Where are we at here? Here it is. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now, please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. But here are the reasons given. Anybody remember the first reason? It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. Now, today in modern psychology, we call this nurture. Right? Nurture versus nature. Nurture is the way we were raised. We're almost always blaming somebody for screwing our head on crookedly, right? My mother screwed my head on. That's why I'm this way. My father abandoned me. My friends are idiots, etc. So other people screw us up. Is that a possibility? Do other people affect us? Yes, of course it's a possibility. Dr. Seuss acknowledges this here. That sometimes our heads aren't screwed on right because people screwed us over. Right? So he says, it could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be, perhaps, that his shoes were too tight. Now, this is a beautiful way of saying, maybe it's not the way we were raised, maybe it's the circumstances around us, it's nature, maybe the culture we were born into, or the school that we're going to, or the job we have, or something is just not right. The shoes are too tight. So Sue says this could be why the Grinch was so grinchy. Could be people screwed him up, or his circumstances screwed him up. But, says Dr. Seuss, I think that the most likely reason of all, anybody know? May have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. Now here, in fact, in the book itself, if you look at it, the word could is italicized. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be perhaps his shoes were too tight. But I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. So essentially what I hear Dr. Seuss to be saying here is this. The Grinch is the way he is because he just is. Can't blame mom and dad. Can't blame society. Stop blaming people. Each of us just comes into this world, as John Keats said, with our own tiny heart that needs to be expanded by this valley of soul making, and the people we meet along the way. In other words, I can spend all my energy going to therapy saying, you know, if my dad hadn't, if my mother should, would, could, and all these things around me were different, then I wouldn't be the way I am. Dr. Seuss says that those can be valid ideas, but just look at the possibility that you are the way you are because you just are. As John Keats said, we come into this world, each of us, with our own unique heart. And each of us comes into this world with our own unique heart so it can be expanded through the people we meet. James Hillman, my favorite psychologist, says it like this in The Soul's Code. And the title of that book is the same as what Keats is saying and what Dr. Seuss is saying. The Soul's Code is that we each come into this world with our own soul's code. Just as we have a genetic code that gave us our biological and physical traits, so we each have a soul's code that give us our heart traits. No one to blame, just the way I am. I have come with an immature, tiny heart, 2 sizes too small, and the only way that heart is going to expand in 2019 is through the people I meet. You understand? So the idea here is that when we go out of this building, we are actually leaving, in some level, Mount Crumpet and going out into Whoville. When you exit this church and you go home, you're entering Whoville. And who's going to be there? The people you live with, the other who's. Sometimes they'll be the Grinch, sometimes you'll be the Grinch. Sometimes they'll be the Who, sometimes you'll be the Cindy Lou Who. In other words, we're all of these different characters, but that's the way the heart changes, is through relationships. Now this takes this illusion away that we're waiting to get somewhere someday so everything will be okay. Right? This utopian vision of someday we're going to reach that great spiritual pie in the sky because after all I'm a spiritual being in a human body. No! You are a human being having an experience of expanding your heart through the who's around yous. Roman says it like this: a unique heart image lies within each person. The categories of nature and nurture do not reach into the heart or see through its eye. In other words, nature-nurture explanation can take you so far, but stop making excuses and being a victim and just recognize that you are the way you are and that the people around you are the instrument of your heart expansion. There's a reason my unique person is here on this earth, and there are things I must attend to. The world somehow wants me here. Isn't that nice? Even though my heart is 2 sizes too small, the world wants me here in order that... How's this story end? After the Grinch goes down and becomes a felon. Really, it's a very violent, awful story. He breaks into people's homes. He steals their presents, their food, their gifts. Doesn't even leave a crumb for the frickin' mouse. And he takes everything and he starts to dump it over a cliff. I mean, this is a very vicious story. But in the end, what happens? He's waiting to hear the Who's wake up, right? Because his whole intention is to destroy them, to obliterate them. His resentment was so strong, he just wanted to hear them weep in pain for having their Christmas stolen from them. But what does he hear? They come out, they hold hands, and they start freaking singing. When you were singing here, I was thinking, this is Whoville, baby. We don't need any dang presents. Got a little food, but not much. It's good. So he hears the singing, and what it says, he thought, it says, in fact, he puzzled and puzzled and puzzled. For 3 hours he puzzled, until his puzzler was broke. See? When you try to figure it out, you can't figure it out. You can't figure out how people are going to change you. You can't figure out who's going to change you. All you can do is figure out that at some point in a relationship that I'm in right now, with a parent, with a child, with a friend, with a partner, the people I'm around, the people who are around me, at some point there's going to be that critical moment where something happens and I change through that relationship. What does it say happened to the Grinch's heart at the end of the story? It grew 3 sizes that day.
Good number.
So the heart has changed. This is what Hillman's talking about here. The world somehow wants me here. I'm answerable to an innate image, which I fill out in my biography. I love that last line. My biography, my life story, is a story of meeting other who's who fill out my biography and fill out my heart. And oftentimes it is through a felonious encounter. You understand? People break into my house. They steal my food. They steal my reputation. They steal my joy. They steal everything that works for me. And yet somehow, according to this story, that's what's working to make my heart break so that it can expand into a bigger heart than it was before. The broken, shattered heart, in this view, one of the reasons we sing these silly songs here is because we trust this one God, this omniscient God presence, His power, because somehow it will take every broken heart and put it back together and make it bigger if we stay in the story. I want to share how this worked for me recently. My father is 93 and he is dying of heart failure. He's otherwise healthy, but he's just slowly, it's giving out. And my wife and I, Cheryl, have been spending a lot of time with him over this last almost year. I lost a brother this last year. I lost a sister this last year. My father's illness, it's been a rough year. Both of her parents are very ill. It's been a rough year. And about 4 months ago or so, I was down at my dad's helping him out with his property and different things. And my dad is typical dad in many ways. I'm still 12. Right? He still treats me like I'm 12. And he was just being critical. Everything I did. Cheryl is the most amazing woman on the planet for him. He's constantly praising her for being so amazing. I am so lucky. How in the world did I find someone like this? And he's just going on and on and on and on. And this has been going on for several weeks. And I finally snapped. You understand? I went from Cindy Lou Who to Grinch. Like that. And you all know what I'm talking about. And I let him have it. He was sitting there in his chair in the living room. Frail little 93-year-old man that used to be this strong, strong, strong man. And I let him have it verbally, emotionally. It takes a lot to make me snap, but when I do, you don't want to be around it. And I went after him, and I went after him, and I said, why can't you treat me like an adult? And we went back and forth, and I started to walk out of the house 4 or 5 times, but I got to the door and I had more to say. So we went at it, and I knew the whole time I was doing it, I was being the Grinch. I was stealing his furniture, I was stealing his food, and he was stealing mine. And we were like 2 Grinches duking it out. I finally left. I said, come on, let's go. Cheryl got in the car. We drove. And on the drive home, I was in one of those states of consciousness that was struggling. Do you understand what I'm talking about? One side of me was saying, he deserved it. The other side was saying, you shouldn't have done that. So that's a who relationship right there. You understand? These kinds of fights and conflicts are Whoville experiences, and you're probably going to have, each of us in this room, some of these in 2019. That's the way it works. Nothing wrong, even when everything's wrong. Now, what made this even more difficult for me was that there was another who involved, not just my dad, but Cheryl. Yeah, we're surrounded by who's. You can't get away from it. This other who, named Cheryl Who, is sitting there next to me, and every relationship I've been in the past, whenever I would do this snap experience, the person I was in relationship with would always, anybody want to guess? Tell me where I screwed up. And I'm waiting. Because I want somebody to tell me how I screwed up so I can fight with them and justify. But this who happens to be a who lets me stay in my own business. So the whole half-hour ride home, you know what she says? Nothing. She's a silent who. Just like the who's in the story. They don't say much. All the work is allowed to go on in the Grinch's heart. So when she doesn't say anything, you know what that leaves me with? My own self. And instead of being able to, in past relationships where I could go from feeling guilty and self-reflection and all this sort of thing and fighting with somebody and justifying it, it was like, this gets me out of me. She was silent. This year you're going to meet certain who's who irritate you through their silence. They're not going to say enough. By the time I got home, I sat down and thought for a while, an hour or two, and I wrote an email to my father, apologizing. We went back the next day, hugged it out, got it straightened out. He looked me in the eye and said, it's okay. Sometimes it's good for each of us to get pissed off a little bit. This is a who-making experience. This is a soul-making experience. And what I want to leave you with this morning is the idea that every who you meet this year in 2019 is going to be a who whose sole intention, whether they or you know it or not, is to expand your heart. To take that heart that is 2 sizes too small and to increase it 3 sizes in one day. Last illustration comes from a Native American Tlingit Haida tribes in the Northwest. They have a dance called the Transformation Dance. And in this dance, the dancer starts out with this huge mask on. I have one at home and I forgot to bring it, but it's a huge mask of an animal face, a Grinch face. Each of us is this animal. Do you understand what I mean by an animal face? That face that just survives, that wants to fight. And in the dance, they talk about the animal coming into the world and just being a sort of animal. And at a certain point in the dance, they talk about the animal coming into relationship with other animals that are dancing in this tribal ceremony. And at a certain point in the relationships between the dancing animals, there's a transformation in the animal, and the mask comes open, and inside, there's a human face. Who are you? You are this, and you are this. Does that make sense? We are animals, and we are humans. And the heart expands when we come in contact with others who sometimes bring us into our worst possible selves, our most animalistic, grinchy selves, in order to take that tiny heart and expand it. So let's, this morning as we close, just take a moment and pray together as we enter this new year. Infinite One, God, Spirit, the invisible presence. We trust this morning that 2019 will open us into an experience of entering into Whoville. We ask you to keep us mindful that every single person we meet, in our bodies, on Facebook, at school, at work, wherever we are. Some of them are going to be Grinches. Help us to remember that they are there to make our hearts expand. Some of them are going to be Cindy Lou Who's. They are there to make our hearts expand. Keep us mindful of this, that we might stay out of unnecessary despair and resentment in 2019. And so it is. Blessings on you in this year to come. Thank you.